Okay. So I encourage you all in the audience to ask as many questions as you would like. I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A as Todd presents. And we have a professional here with a lot of experience within this area. So now is the time to ask questions and find out those secrets of a recruiter. So with that, I'm going to do a very quick introduction of Todd and then turn it over. So Todd is a 2015 Penn State graduate. He majored in labor studies and employment relations and minored in psychology with the business option. He currently resides in New York City, working at Viacom CBS on their campus and early career recruiting team. So Todd, I will let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Awesome. Can you guys see that?
So we're actually now we're good. Yep.
Perfect. Okay.
Yep.
Love Zoom. Okay. Awesome. So as Lauren mentioned, my name is Todd. I'm a Penn State alum, and I'm currently on the campus and early career recruiting team at Viacom CBS. So I'll give a quick background on myself and how I got here, and then I have a few slides prepared just talking about the overall recruiting process, building your resume, crafting your cover letter, and then just some tips and tricks of navigating the application process, including the applicant tracking system. So background on me, I am a 2015 Penn State grad. I was super involved in liberal arts college while I was at Penn State. I was involved in the liberal arts undergraduate council, and I was a liberal arts envoy, which I believe has since renamed to the liberal arts ambassadors. Also at Penn State, I was involved in Thon as well as line ambassadors. So the Penn State degree and just the overall experiences I've had pretty much helped me navigate my career search, as well as just all the skill sets that I've learned to be successful in the real world. So very appreciative and super excited to talk to you guys today. So I've been in HR pretty much since I've graduated, and I've been in recruiting for the last, I believe, 6 years. Feels like much longer, but I've been at JP Morgan, Deloitte, American Express, and now Viacom CBS, all within their recruiting functions. So I've gotten to see a bunch of different ways of how recruiting's done. And I was telling Lauren before that the tips that I put on here are just general things that I've seen and heard from recruiters from all those different companies, but share a lot of the same sentiments, and thought this would be really helpful to share with you guys. So as Lauren mentioned, I'll have some slides, and then if you guys have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box and we can go through those as well. So the first page is just about building your resume. Wanted to make sure that we talk about just what that document looks like, really how to make the most of it, and how to stand out when you're going through the application process. So the resume should act as a standalone document that tells us where you're at and where you're going. Really try to keep it to one page. I feel like people more probably like 10 years down the line, or even like for me, I'm still, when I'm looking for jobs, I've always tried to keep it to one page, using the most relevant experience. For me, probably by the time I was like 3 or 4 years out of college, I removed a lot of my college experiences. But for now, especially as you're navigating the internship or the full-time job search, a lot of the experience will be from college and even potentially maybe like senior year of high school. So be really judicious with what you include on there, but make sure that it's most relevant to the role that you're applying for. Clear and concise bullet points. Recruiters are typically reviewing bundles and bundles of resumes at a time. So they want to be able to quick look at a resume, skim it, and see, just make sure that there's enough information that they can gather kind of a colorful picture of your experience, your background, and what you've done in your various positions in and out of the classroom. Adding quantitative examples where applicable. So this means like if you've hired or if you've been involved in like an organization that recruited 50 members and you were responsible for helping to recruit them, any numbers that you can include throughout your resume really gives the recruiter a better sense of your experience. And especially if those numbers or percentages are really high, it's really good to highlight those, especially if you have a success rate with training, maybe cashiers at a supermarket, or you've worked on a group project that maybe scored a really high percentage in like a contest or something. It's really good to include those where you can, because it really helps you stand out, especially when recruiters are scanning resumes. Using action verbs and watching your tense. I've looked at so many resumes where they're currently in the job, but their action tense is either in the past tense or it's not matching their current status. So pretty much if it's not your current role, so if it says like September 2021 to December 2021, like those should all be in past tense. The only roles that, or the only parts of your resume that should be in present tense are the ones you're currently in. So if you've wrapped up a job or a club or just something that you're not currently involved in, make sure you're updating the tense for those. Sometimes, especially when I was applying for jobs, I always forgot to go back and update if I've changed a job, they remove all the present tense from those. A little goes a long way in just really making sure that you're putting your best foot forward. Highlighting transferable experiences, so clubs, coursework, leadership roles, affiliations. This one's an interesting one, and I'll give an example about myself as well. I think sometimes when you're looking at a job posting that you don't realize how much transferable skills you actually have into the role. So this is kind of, I guess, more of an interview tip. Anytime I've ever interviewed for a role, what I've done since college, I actually learned this from my liberal arts mentor that I was aligned to my junior year, is to take the job description and put it into like a Word document. And under each bullet of the qualifications, make a sub bullet and put examples of your experience that you've been a part of. So it really shows you how much kind of transferable experience you have for the role that you're applying to. But also, in my mind, it really helped me gain confidence to be like, wow, I actually have a lot more experience and examples I can share during this interview process, because mapping it out that way made things so much easier. And it kind of took it all out of my mind and was able to put it on the paper. One example I have is when I knew that I wanted to do an HR internship, but I didn't really have any HR experience when I was looking for internships. So I was talking to my mentor and I was talking to those in the Career Enrichment Network. And I was saying, all I have is really, I was a cashier at a supermarket in New Jersey. I'm like, I don't really have any other experience that I can apply to say, oh, I have an HR background. And they were digging deeper and they're like, what'd you do at, it was called ShopRite. And I was like, well, I was a cashier. I also trained the cashiers who started. And then I realized, oh, wow, like training, that's part of learning and development, which is part of HR. And I was able to draw those connections, which initially I was like, oh, I'm a cashier, that's not transferable. I was balancing school and work at some point. So it was really helpful to say, okay, I've learned how to prioritize because I'm balancing multiple deliverables at once, which could be for a project management type role. So you'll be surprised with how your experience can really map out with different roles that you're interested in, especially if it's a role that you may not have direct experience that's kind of similar to what I experienced. So definitely make sure you're being really specific and highlighting all the different clubs. A lot of the clubs that I was in college, I tried to be very intentional with, and I tried to say, okay, if I'm going to be in this club, like what skill sets can I get out of it? Even down to Thon, when my senior year, I was a captain for donor and alumni relations, which I think that name has since changed. But I wanted to make sure even in that role that I'm having a really good experience, I'm giving back, and I'm also being able to get leadership experience. I worked with a lot of donors, which helped with professional just business acumen, and even down to being a tour guide. I was a Lion ambassador and we would give tours all the time. And I used that also to kind of help me get into recruiting, because I'm walking backwards for almost 2 hours in very uncomfortable Sperry's talking about just selling Penn State. And I realized if I can sell Penn State in this kind of environment, I'm like, I can sell a role as a recruiter. So no longer Wayne Sperry's, but it really helped me kind of figure out where I wanted to be and how my experience in college really transferred to the working world. Checking spelling and grammar is a big one, and have others review, especially for me, even in college. Like if I'm looking at something for too long, I kind of overlook some obvious mistakes. So once you're done with your resume and your cover letter, which we'll talk about on the next slide, send it to your mom, your friends, your coworkers, club members, anyone, your advisor, just anyone who can quick have a scan at it, because they may catch things that you didn't see. Formatting is key. I have probably the biggest question I get is, how do I make it one page? And the biggest thing is to make the margins as big as you can, especially in the virtual environment. It's great because you don't have to print anything out. So sometimes it can be weird when you're printing out a resume and the margins are really small. But for me, my current resume, I have 0.05 on left and right. And I've made the top and bottom headers as small as possible. And I've made the font maybe size 10. And then I looked for a font within the different choices in Word to see what kind of makes it a little smaller. And just trying to format it in a way that I'm I have a lot of experience. I don't want to make it 2 pages, but I want to make it digestible for someone who's going to quick skim it. There's a ton of different resources online and through the Career Enrichment Network that you can see different templates and the best way to format your resume. But again, there's always different ways that you could format the resume. There's no right or wrong way, but this is definitely something that is super imperative, especially when you're applying to jobs. I didn't include this on here, but being in the entertainment industry, we have actually gotten a lot of questions about this, which is a question I never thought about until being in my current role, is about the templates of the resume. And we've seen it a lot in my current role because there's a lot more of creative type roles, a lot of production and just like set design and things where a lot of people use Canva. We've tried to shy away from using Canva for resumes unless the role that you're applying to kind of has like a graphic design or more creative element, especially because when it's downloaded onto an ATS, the formatting always shifts. And typically if they're going to download it, it will be in black and white. So if you put like colors on it, it may not even transfer when it's being downloaded. And it's just easier to quick scan it through. I think they look more aesthetically pleasing than the standard resume, but if you're applying to like a finance role or to something more less on like the a side that would kind of require you to show those skill sets, it's just easier to have just like the white piece of paper with a black font. And then finally, I cannot express this enough, save and upload as a PDF. I think even for me, when I was applying for jobs in college, I used a Word document, and being on the back end, it almost makes candidates stand out in a negative way because there's so many resumes that recruiters are reviewing that if it's downloaded as a Word document, it doesn't actually bundle up with the rest of the resumes because the applicant tracking system is only able to pull bundles of PDFs. So when it's not a PDF, the Word document actually doesn't even download. You have to go back in and see which ones you missed, and then you would have to download the Word document. So when in doubt, just make it as soon as you're done with you can create obviously the resume on Word, but just make sure to save it and upload it as a PDF. All right, I know there was a lot here.
Real quick, Todd. So it looks like we have a question that came in from Sarah. So she says, I have used a trick of making the margins 0.5, and I was told it wasn't the best margin size by the Career Enrichment Network. My resume was not approved for this once. Are 0.5 margins okay to use, or does Penn State prefer 1.0 margins on a resume? So I can give a perspective from the Career Enrichment Network, and then Todd, if you want to kind of take it from there. So we typically say that you want to have your margins in between 1/2 inch and 1 inch, just because that's kind of the size. Like 1/2 inch is wide enough where like it's not looking like it's pushed like too far to the edge of the paper, and 1 inch, if you have it like wider than 1 inch, then and larger than 1 inch, it kind of crunches everything together. So that's why we typically recommend that. But I'm wondering, Todd, if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, no, that is totally relevant. And I would say
Yeah.
trying to squeeze enough on a page, mine was always the 1 inch margins, because I think you also don't want it to feel too crammed that like I kind of went back and forth with that about like, do I have too much information on here, which kind of forced me to look at my experience and say, okay, what can I take off? Like, what is the most important stuff to include? I think especially as a college student, I think the 0.5 to 1 is probably it's probably the easiest. I think when you get to a point where you need to potentially move into 1 page to 2 pages, then it gets a little more tricky, but it's all just like the creativity of trying to squeeze it all into 1 page. So
absolutely. Thanks. We actually have another question that came in. So how do recruiters feel about business headshots?
On the resume, because typically a lot of the recruiters, especially, or the hiring managers, will go on someone's LinkedIn. It really depends. I will say, like, when I look at if there's a headshot on the resume, I typically don't really look at it. I more just want to look at, because I want to keep it as unbiased as possible. So I typically just go right to the education and the experience just to make sure that I'm basing it off the resume. So I would probably, if you have space for it, you can include it, but I would say that it's not necessary, and it's definitely not something that would like either put you in a better or worse spot when applying for jobs.
So as a quick follow-up question, if you have like a business headshot or something like that you would maybe include as an other document submission or something like that, I think that's what the student's asking about, maybe not necessarily tied to the resume, but as an additional document. Is it a plus?
I wouldn't say so. I think especially like over the last couple of years, we're trying to really eliminate bias in the recruiting process. So people try to just keep it to looking at their resume and basing their judgment off of just the overall experience. I will say when resumes are sent to managers, they're typically either just a resume bundle or a cover letter bundle, or just the resume and the cover letter. They wouldn't typically send any other documents other than that. I don't think I've ever seen someone send a headshot. I don't think it would hurt, but I don't think it would be a benefit. It's kind of a personal preference, but I think to eliminate bias, people try to remove the pictures and just like look at the experience for what it is.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Todd.
Yeah. Also, just while I'm looking at do you already see the next slide on here? Or am I sharing the wrong slide or the wrong desktop?
It looks like I'm seeing building your resume.
Perfect. Okay. feel like a grandpa when it comes to Zoom, but I'm happy you're able to see this. Okay, awesome. All right, crafting your cover letter. The number one question I feel like is always asked is, do I need a cover letter? I always say it never hurts to include one. I've always sent one, just because I rather have more information than not. And I rather not worry about like if there's any gaps in my resume that the hiring manager is thinking about. I rather just include all of it. But I will say if you are going to do a cover letter, I included some tips and tricks on here. Make sure it's customized to the role and the company that you're applying to. I realize I should have put this bullet next to it, but make sure you have the right company name. I've seen a lot of cover letters where, I mean, I do it too. When I was in college, I typically just took the same cover letter template and just changed the company name. And it's very easy now as a recruiter to kind of see when that is the case, because it seems like it's a very generalized cover letter. And a lot of the times the company name is wrong. So especially one thing that I used to do is like, if I am going to use a variation of the cover letter that like almost as my standard template, I've always saved my own draft and I've highlighted all the things I need to make sure that I change. So like, for example, if I'm applying to Viacom CBS, but I'm using a template from JP Morgan, the template would have JP Morgan highlighted everywhere. So like when I go to edit it, I make sure that like, as I'm removing all the highlighted words, I'm replacing it with the correct company name. But that is definitely something that would deter a recruiter or a hiring manager if they can quickly see that it's just a template that you've used that's not customized to the role. But a lot of people use the cover letters as a way just to elaborate on any experience within your resume that would be relevant. For example, I used my cover letter to talk about my experience at ShopRite because when I was looking for my internship, I was like, I really don't have any other experience to highlight other than clubs. So I might as well talk about just some wins that I had as training different cashiers and what that looked like. So it's definitely a good spot, especially if you feel like you're running out of space on your resume. That's another area where the cover letter can really come in handy. I've been in companies where they, like, for example, Deloitte, the hiring manager required a cover letter, whereas some companies kind of use it as like a nice to have. To me, I think it's good because it provides more color, and it almost, in my mind, especially with a virtual environment where there's less in-person recruiting events, the cover letter, in my mind, it kind of fills in the gaps that maybe the resume has. Like for me, when I used to go to recruiting events and I looked at someone's resume, if there were any holes that I was trying to kind of get more information on, then I would just be able to like talk to them in person. Whereas it's a little more tricky to do that with the virtual recruiting events. So I always would encourage putting together a cover letter. If you feel like you're running out of space on the page and you're like, I want to highlight more about my experience at Deloitte, then you can use that as a cover letter, maybe like a specific project you worked on, or different skill sets you want to highlight to the manager. I think it never hurts to have one, and it can be used for a bunch of different ways as well. Another area is pivoting to a different job. I was actually just talking to one of my friends a couple of weeks ago, and she's currently in finance and she's looking to go into more sports management. And she's like, nothing on my resume says sports management or anything related to sports, but I don't know how to kind of convey that to a manager or to a recruiter. And that's when I suggested the cover letter, because that's the perfect spot to kind of give an anecdote on why you're looking to go into a different career. And again, it kind of fills in those gaps in the resume, because if I were looking at her resume, I would say, okay, she's primarily finance. This role needs a little more sports management, but in her cover letter, she can explain kind of why she's pivoting, why her skill sets may be finance focused, but how they're transferable to a like sports management type role. And it really sets you up for success that way, because a lot of managers sometimes aren't looking for direct experience. Sometimes they're just looking for transferable skills. So if you're able to convey that between your cover letter and your resume, you will definitely be set. Starting with a creative line or anecdote to catch your attention, especially when recruiters and managers are looking at a ton of different resumes. The ones that always catch my eye are the ones that have a really creative line in the beginning. You wanted to keep it professional, but if there's any like anecdotes or any stories that you can tell about kind of where you started and where you're at. I believe I used, when I was a tour guide, I include like a tour guide story as my first paragraph. Just a few lines, because I wanted to talk about what kind of got me into HR, and kind of how I ended up having interest in recruiting. So you can definitely make it personalized, but keep it professional. But I think it's also a creative way to show that you're not just using a standardized template, that you're finding different ways to stand out. Keep it around half a page. I would say, I mean, if it goes 3/4 of a page, that's fine. You don't want to make it more than one page, and you don't want it to feel like it's too long. I would say maybe 3 paragraphs at most. This is definitely the spot to be really clear and concise while sharing your experience, because it's technically in addition to your resume. So you don't want it to feel like it's another whole thing they have to read. You wanted to make it feel like, okay, there's a value in reading this cover letter, and here's why. So including those quantitative examples is also a great idea, especially if you have too many bullets on your resume and you want to include even more, the cover letter is a good spot to do that. And then finally, have a friend or family member review. If you're like me, I make endless spelling errors and I don't even catch it until it's too late. So definitely have someone look at your cover letter, proofread it. It's just good to be able to have another set of eyes on something that you've probably been staring at for longer than you want. So it's nice to be able to have someone kind of with a fresh set of eyes take a look at it, and they can even potentially maybe read things differently. I'm someone where I'm just like, my baseline is just very dry and sarcastic. And I can see sometimes in the professional world where that translates into an email, but if you're on the receiving end of it, it may not translate the way that I expect it to. So sometimes almost kind of removing those like parts of the cover letter that may feel a little odd, it's nice to have another person look at that and say, I think you could wear this a little better or a different way. It's just nice to have another opinion on that. That's everything cover letters. Lauren, did we get any questions about cover letters specifically?
None yet. I will keep monitoring the chat, and I encourage everybody, if any of you have questions, please include them in the chat or in the Q&A. So you can keep going, Todd.
Awesome. Okay. The last thought I have before opening up for questions is the applicant tracking system, which we call ATS, but I think it's depending on what company it is, everyone calls it something differently and everyone has a different applicant tracking system. So I created this slide just thinking of some different things that it's kind of like behind the scenes stuff that I didn't learn until I was a recruiter. And it's stuff I wish I would have known earlier on. So I may think of some more things as I'm talking, but these are some highlights that I wanted to make sure that we chatted about. So the first is, what is an applicant tracking system? This is anything from, you're probably most familiar with Workday. I know a lot of big companies use Workday. There's like Taleo, iSIMS, there's a ton of different success factors. There's a ton of different ways, but this is pretty much the system where you're applying for the job. And then on the back end, how the recruiter is looking at your application. So again, always save your resume and cover letter as a PDF. Like I mentioned, they will pull they typically will pull resumes as a bundle. Like on the back end, we have pretty much a list of everyone who applied, and you will just click all the names you want to download, and then it will give you a bundle. So if it's a Word document, it won't be included in that bundle. Or if it is, the formatting is completely off. The one thing that you can make sure when you have a PDF is like, once you download it as a PDF, the formatting is not going to change. Whereas if you download a Word doc, if you upload a Word document, the formatting gets super finicky. And sometimes it's very hard to read. And what you think might be one page may be broken out into like 7 different pages, depending on the applicant tracking system. So just to make sure as a best practice to always save it as a PDF. Be selective and intentional around what jobs you're applying for. Again, I've been in your spot. I've applied for endless jobs. And I will say on the back end, it's interesting, especially for a manager sometimes, if they ask a recruiter, like, how many other jobs is this person in consideration for? And you go into their profile. I've had times where we've had people who applied for like 17 different jobs, and they're all completely different profiles of like what the skill sets are looking for. And sometimes it comes off like they may not know either exactly what they're looking for. They're just trying to get their foot in the door if they just don't know where their experience matches. And sometimes, depending on who the recruiter is, they may look at it as, we need to have someone who has direct experience and has an idea of where they want to go. Sometimes, like, for example, on the back end, I was looking at a role for one of our current internship opportunities, and I can see that this candidate also applied for like entry-level roles. So like, we can see on the back end for every role that you apply to. The manager won't be able to unless they ask, but sometimes the recruiter will flag it to be like, just a heads up, here's Todd's resume. He's also in process for like 6 other roles, or he also applied to like 10 other positions. And depending on the manager, they may react a certain way. So just being very intentional around what jobs you're applying for, and where your experience is the best fit. I guess I can combine this next one with the last bullet. No news isn't bad news. I was talking to Lauren about this before, that I'm 100% guilty of this, that like, I'll apply for a job and expect an answer like yesterday. I think it's almost like you've seen those memes about like Amazon packages, like you order something and like the next second you're like waiting by your doorstep to see if it arrived. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that sometimes unfortunately might drag out a process a little bit, but no news isn't bad news. It just means that the recruiter is most likely working on other jobs outside that one. And they also have managers and other roles and other candidates that they're talking to. So sometimes like, it's always not bad to send a follow-up, but if you don't hear anything back, it's just because they're probably balancing or they're behind on their emails. So again, no news isn't bad news. And as much as like, I need to take my own advice, patience is a big one as well. Just making sure that like, I would say even after like a week, sometimes like they may take a bit to look at it. So for example, a lot of internship postings, they'll be open for all of the fall, but like they may not even start recruiting, especially like in the entertainment industry, for example, until they may not even look at resumes until January, but our job postings are open until like start in September. So no news isn't bad news. It just depends on the company, the recruiter, and the timing. If you're graduating soon, include your personal email and not your school email. The reason why I say this is I was just on a meeting before this about reaching out to past interns to make sure that we can keep them in our pipeline for future opportunities. But what we realize is at some schools, once you graduate, you don't have your email anymore. So making sure you apply with like your Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, whatever you have as your personal email, it just makes things easier. And sometimes a lot of emails in my last role, like they would always go to like a school email's junk mailbox or junk folder. So I never would hear back from some students and I realized that they were receiving the emails, but it was going into the folder that they weren't checking. So as a best practice, I've always just recommended using your personal email. Check spelling throughout the application and then update your LinkedIn to make sure everything matches. I will say pretty much 95% of the time, if a manager receives resumes, they will probably look them up on LinkedIn just to see if they can get a full picture of the candidate. So just make sure everything matches and that the spelling is correct. And I will also say, depending on the role, you will most likely have to confirm everything that you've done through a background check. I'll say probably one of the two biggest areas where I've seen offers be rescinded on the intern side is one, the transcript says something other than the GPA that was on the resume. So typically when they do if they're collecting transcripts, they're looking for the cumulative GPA. A lot of candidates will put their major GPA because it may be higher than the cumulative GPA, but usually the baseline that they're looking for is a cumulative one. So just be mindful of that, but also be mindful of the experience. I caught this when I was applying for a job that I guess I changed the name of my one role and they reached out to me and were like, oh, look, it says that you are in this role, but you wrote on your resume that you're in this role. And it was like a very easy fix that I just like changed the name of the role because it was more intuitive. But we've had a lot of people who have said that they worked at a certain job for X amount of months. And when we did the background check, we realized that they either never worked there or was for a shorter period of time. So just make sure that everything's accurate and that everything matches on your resume and your LinkedIn. I learned this one the hard way because I feel like, again, I'm very impatient. Typically, you'll find out if you move to the next steps via email and not on the company's career site. I'm someone like the second I would apply for a job, I would immediately go look to the career site to see my employee profile and to see if it's updated. Typically, the recruiters are balancing a lot of requisitions and a lot of job postings that they may not be as, I guess, they may not be updating the system as much as they should. So there'd be some times where like I'm still sitting in resume review when I know that I either made it to the interview round or I'm no longer being considered. I will say the best practice on the recruiter's end is to always send an email if you're not being moved forward in the process. I'll say that's probably the only time that they will actually update it is if they are no longer considering you for the position. They'll update that on the career site. But what I've noticed is that you will find out if you're moved to the next round via an email. You will never usually find out that you moved to the next round in the system before you get an email. At least that's from what I've seen on the back end, that typically like if people are interested in moving forward with you, you'll get an email about like scheduling a resume, not a resume, an interview or a phone screen or something like that. Very often, at least on my end, I've very rarely seen that the company would update or the recruiter would update on the back end without communicating to the candidate, unless it's that they're no longer being considered. I know that was a lot and I'm a fast talker. So any questions, I'm happy to.
So we had a couple questions coming, Todd.
Sure.
So the first one is, would you mind just explaining real quick how it works with applicant tracking systems if you write your resume within Word or with Google Docs, and how that works if you were to upload it that way versus saving them as PDF?
Definitely. So typically when recruiters are looking at like an internship position, for example, like I'll give just give a random example. Like if Viacom CBS is looking at all marketing internships, they will have like a marketing requisition open. So we'll be able to see if like 1,000 people applied, we can filter on different things and we can check off, okay, like these first 50 people, I'm going to look at their resumes. So you can create what we call a resume bundle, which is pretty much just one long PDF file. And typically that's how we will send to managers too. It's the easiest way to consolidate all the files because Word doesn't have that same functionality where you can create a bundle the way that you can do with PDFs. So we say to save your resume as a PDF as a best practice, because for Word documents, I actually was able to see what I tested one time at one of my previous roles, what my Word document resume looked like when I uploaded it. And it looked so nice when I had it as a Word document. And then when I uploaded it, became like 4 pages and the margins got super small and just like it looked very different than the formatted way that I created it. So typically when recruiters are batching it, when you go to batch a resume bundle, aka putting a bunch of resumes together in a file to send to a manager, the Word documents don't pull. Especially if it's going to be a PDF file, a Word document wouldn't pull in the PDF file. So you would have to go back in, the recruiter would have to download the Word document, convert it to a PDF, and then put it into the bundle. It's just additional extra steps. And sometimes, depending on who the recruiter is, they may not even consider it, which is a terrible thing. But that's kind of, especially when you're dealing with high volume, they want to make sure it's as quick and easy as possible. So I know it's obviously not the easiest, but I would say if you are working in a Word document or a Google Sheet, to download into a PDF once you're completely done with it. And I think even when I was in college, I don't think I had Adobe on my computer, but I believe I used to go to one of the computer labs, and they had it, and that's how I used to do it. But what you can like rest assured with the PDF is that your formatting will not change when it's uploaded. And from what I've also learned and heard from candidates is that once you upload a PDF, it auto-populates into the profile when you have to fill in all your stuff within the system a lot easier than if it was a Word document. Does that answer the question? I'm happy to elaborate more.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. So the next question that came through was, if you don't get the job, is it common for employers to not contact you to tell you that you haven't gotten it? Or do they generally let you know that you didn't get the position?
It's a good question. And I would say, depending on who you ask, I'll probably give a different answer. From what I've seen is that if you made it past at least the first round of the interviews, the best practice is to let the candidate know. So currently, for example, I have an open role on my team, and I finished my phone screens last week, and I was looking at moving forward who's going to move to the interview rounds with my team members, and everyone who I met with, who I had a conversation with, I sent them an email if they were not being moved forward in the process, and I called the people who were. So it depends on the recruiter. I feel like every recruiter has like a different process, because what I've learned from being in recruiting is that there's like a standard process, but a lot of recruiters kind of put their own personal touch on it. So if they're dealing with high volume, they may only reach out to the candidates who are qualified for the position. The best practice on the recruiter's end should be to at least send like an automatic reply that they're not being moved forward. But more often than not, they're either just update the system so it'll show on your end, or they may not say anything at all. But unfortunately, that's kind of how it is, especially when they're dealing with high volume. But I would say if you even made it to the round where you're talking to a recruiter, a best practice on the recruiter's end should be to reach out to you to give you an update.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It looks like we had another one that just came through. So what if I just graduated and I didn't work before at all? What can I write in my resume?
I think it's good to highlight the skill. Like if you're in a club or an extracurricular activity at Penn State, that's super helpful. I think those almost kind of helped me when I was first applying to my internships, because at that point I was involved in Liberal Arts Undergraduate Council, and I just started as, I believe it's now called the Liberal Arts Ambassadors, and I was involved in Thon. So I was trying to frame it as, okay, I'm balancing school with also these extracurricular activities, and also kind of taking the skill sets that I've learned from them to kind of highlight that in my resume. I will also say that, like, not especially with entry level jobs, I know we always see those like memes of like, oh, you need to have like 15 years experience for a role like right out of college. And those are inevitably everywhere, unfortunately. But I feel like if you're able to highlight your extracurriculars, because sometimes if I see someone who didn't have a job like pre-graduation, but has like an amazing GPA, was involved in a bunch of clubs, like that's just as good, because it shows that you balanced all your extracurriculars with your schoolwork and also still studied hard and got a good GPA. Like there's a case for everyone. And there's also like, I would never rule someone out because of that, because there's also things behind the scenes that may happen that prevented you from receiving a job. So it's not a deterring factor at all. It really depends on the role that you're applying to.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Emily had asked a question, is there anything different that you would change or highlight on a resume when applying to a graduate program versus a job? So I don't know if you could speak to that at all.
I would say, I think the coursework is really big. Especially if there's been any big projects that you've reported on or been a part of. I think for me, I took a class I forgot what it was called, but there was a class that was really focused on just like research. So I used a lot of those examples, like any type of did like a big report. I'm pretty sure I took an LAR class that was like simply just putting together essays. So I would probably highlight something like that. but I haven't been involved in too much of like the graduate program recruiting, so I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction, but I feel like there's definitely ways you could probably highlight yourself and your experience outside of that.
Yeah, so I can touch on that a little bit. So from a career coaching perspective, when you're applying to graduate programs versus a job, it's going to look very similar resume wise. You may include things like if the grad admissions program is maybe looking for a CV, like references and different things like that, that you wouldn't necessarily put on a resume. You could also put things like, and again, this is very similar depending on your experiences, like relevant coursework or relevant projects or relevant papers or thesis or capstone projects, different things like that. But otherwise, coming out of undergrad, it's going to look very, very similar. One thing, Emily, that we did today was or actually I think it was yesterday, was hosted a liberal arts career week event on the graduate application process. And that's going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So highly recommend checking that out at the beginning of next week. And that can give you a little bit more about the admissions process information. So next, we have another question that came in for you, Todd. Would you add jobs such as working as a hostess on your resume, or do you think recruiters would prefer to see more professional experiences like internships?
I think it depends on where you're at with your career. Like for me, I think probably after my first job, I ended up removing ShopRite because I had enough experience that was relevant to the role that I was applying to that I didn't keep things that were if there was like a job where I felt like, oh, like this highlights my experience more than like my ShopRite job did. But I would definitely include it on, especially if you were balancing that with school. And also there's customer service is a big part of being a hostess that like, that's a great thing to highlight. Especially when you're dealing with difficult customers, like there's definitely different skill sets that you can focus on as being a hostess that would be transferable to a lot of different jobs that you can definitely highlight. So I would definitely include it, especially if it's something that was like you're balancing school and work, or if it's just something that you were committing a lot of time to, I definitely would include that on there.
Awesome, thank you. Another question. So what qualities of a student's resume or cover letter, like when you're looking through all of those resume bundles, like really stand out to you?
For me, I typically skim right. I quick look to the extracurriculars and the work experience. Because for me, I always find it interesting. Like everyone will able to eventually have some like level of a job or an internship, but like I kind of like to see what people do outside the classroom because I feel like that makes someone more well-rounded as a candidate. And I found that I've noticed this a lot recently that I wish I did because I never even thought about this. But a lot of people have been putting on the bottom of their resumes like their interests and like, oh, like I love skiing, I love reality TV. And like I wish I even thought about that when I was in college. And I've seen a lot of managers love that because it almost helps them break the ice in the interview process. They're like, oh, like I also love to ski. Like, where do you go skiing? And like it helps kind of break the ice and makes it almost like a nice way of finding common ground with a manager. That there's some times that a manager will find such common ground with an intern candidate outside of the work experience that like they'll invest the time in like developing them and growing them, that they'll make select a candidate based off of that. So depending on the recruiter, they'll probably answer that question completely different. But I think, I mean, especially with like the GPAs and stuff, some companies look at that very sternly. Some companies don't look at it at all. I would say that it's been something that we're like over the years, I've seen less of an emphasis on is like the GPA. I mean, obviously still going to class and getting a grade is important, but like I've seen that as less of a deterring factor and more of kind of like what's been done outside the classroom that's really helped you kind of expand your skill sets and your overall just like background.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, I'm wondering if you could elaborate on some of the common mistakes you might see. Like, so say the resume or cover letter gets past the ATS system. Are there any common mistakes that you might see?
Like as someone's like reviewing the resume?
Yeah. So like as a recruiter, if like one candidate is standing out over another.
Yeah. I would say probably the biggest error like that if I'm comparing to candidates is being descriptive. Some people will make it very bare bones and like it'll be very like there's definitely ways, and I've noticed this when I even was looking at my original resume. Like when I first started at ShopRite, I didn't realize how much transferable skills I had, that like I had like 3 words per bullet line and there was so much white space on the page that if I as a recruiter now was looking at my own resume, I would have been like they could have elaborated on this. And I even helped my sister with her resume when she was working at a sandwich shop in our town, and she's like, I don't know how I'm going to make this sound like it's like a full job. And I'm like, it is. I'm like, if you start like writing all the stuff that you've done into like full sentences, I'm like, it almost like once we were doing that, she's like, oh wait, I can add this in and this in. And then it became like a full section that she didn't realize how much transferable skills come from jobs where I think people almost automatically rule it out the way that I did with mine. And like, if you take a step back, she had customer service experience, like she was balancing that with like a full coursework. It's just like quality control. There's so many different things that she was able to highlight, just to be super descriptive in the bullets. And even like quantitative, she helped train like 6 new hires. I was like, include that on there. That's awesome. Like, even if it was 1 new hire, like you've been able to help someone else grow in the role. It's almost like a mentorship type thing. So there's definitely ways that you can work all the different experiences that you've had.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I'm seeing any other questions come in. This was fabulous, Todd. Thank you so much. I feel like as much as like I or a faculty member or staff member or even like someone's parent can say like, oh, this is what an recruiter is looking for or an employer is looking for, like having your firsthand perspective has been wonderful. Oh, it looks like we had another question come in real quick before wrapping up. So if you've had multiple positions at a job, do you have any tips on consolidating information on a resume so it doesn't go past a page?
Yeah, this is one where I struggle with because I went through a rotational program right out of college at JP Morgan, and then I ended up placing it to the role that was managing my program that I went through. And I struggled so much with trying to consolidate it. And I feel like I looked up so many examples on Google, and I feel like every example I saw was completely different. So what I ended up doing was like, I wrote JP Morgan on the top and I wrote like the full years that I was there, and I try to consolidate as much as possible. So like I try to like double line if it was like the title and the years I was like the months, the years I was there. And then I try to consolidate the bullets that way. But it's tricky. I mean, it depends. Like my resume is a little over 2 pages now. I just couldn't fit it without it looking just crazy into a resume, into a 1 page. But I would say as much as you can like double use like the same line for like the location of the job, how many years you've been there, the titles, like finding ways like that make things so much easier. So like you can literally just make like a header to say like I was at JP Morgan from like 2015 to 2017. And then I had like I had 5 different roles there, and I was able to squeeze it into 1 just based off of the formatting. It was tricky, but there's definitely ways around it. But I think I ended up using like a template that I found on Google because I just was like, there's no way I can get this to 1 page, and I end up being able to. So Google was my best friend, especially when it comes to stuff like that.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. And for all of you who have like very specific resume questions, remember, you can absolutely make an appointment with either myself or another career coach in the Liberal Arts Career Enrichment Network, and we can definitely help you craft your resume. We get our information from people like Todd, so we're kind of following his and other recruiters' guidelines of what they're looking for. So another question came in. So what would you recommend doing at college that can be added to the resume other than having an internship? And I know you also talked a little bit about like student leadership and activities.
Yeah, I think extracurriculars are super helpful. I mean, even for me, it was nice to have like a break from class and just like go to like a thon meeting or like the LAUC meetings. It was just nice to be able to like meet new people. I would say some of my closest friendships that I still have to this day are from my clubs that I was in. So I definitely recommend it. Penn State has, I feel like I'm a tour guide right now. Penn State has like the most clubs out of like any big school that like, there's literally a club for everyone. And I believe you can also create one if you'd like. In the hub, I think there's a career, I forgot what the office is called. I'm like pretending I'm still in college with my tour guide facts, but I would definitely recommend the extracurriculars. For me, like even when I was like exploring, I'm like, is HR the right path for me? I joined SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, and it was nice. I ended up not putting it on my resume. I ended up taking it off as one of the first things that I took off because I didn't do anything other than just like sit in the meetings. But it was nice for me to be like, I can kind of reaffirm my interest in HR if I'm coming to the meetings here from HR professionals. And I got to meet a lot of people who I ended up having so many classes with that it was nice to be able to start a new semester knowing I'm like, oh, I'll probably run into some familiar faces because I was in clubs with them. So I would say the extracurriculars are probably the biggest thing. And then just like the relevant coursework and stuff that if there was like a big project you worked on, like presented somewhere, went to a conference, like there's different ways that you can highlight it. But definitely mirroring Lauren's point, I feel like I lived at the Career Enrichment Network in college. I was there all the time. And they have so many resources that I feel like every time I went, I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize you guys did that too. And I feel like by the end, I was just like, everything that I created in my college experience was with them. So I can't say enough good things. So I feel like I pretty much still know like Susan now is still there. I feel like everyone who I used to not work with, I used to go there and have them help me with my stuff is still there. So definitely
That's
great
awesome.
resources.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. Come and see us. We are located in
Yes.
101 Sparks Building. Just to add on to that, Todd, for those who might be interested in more of like the academic routes of things, research experience for undergraduates, volunteer experience, those are all good to put on your resume as well. But definitely underscoring what Todd said about internships, leadership, clubs, activities, all of those are awesome. Another question came in. So if you only have one club that you have been really involved in, is that better than having a lot of clubs that you've spent less effort in, or should you try to have more than one?
I think it's quality, not quantity. Like, I feel like if I'm looking at a resume and all they have is like active member for like 5 clubs versus like I was in Ohana and I had like X amount of leadership roles. Like I went canning 5 times. Like there's definitely ways that like, I'm pretty sure like I've looked at a ton of resumes that have like, they've been in maybe 1 to 2 clubs and they've been heavily involved in it. I would prefer that over having someone who was just like, when I first started, I joined so many clubs and my resume was like active member. And I'm like, I have no sub bullets. I would not be able to speak beyond just being like, I go to the meetings. So I think that it's definitely good to highlight if you've been in one club and you've done a ton for it, definitely go for it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So with that, I think we're going to end it here. If anyone has any follow-up questions, like please feel free to email and we can get those questions out to Todd. If you have any questions that you want to ask him directly, we can connect you. But otherwise, Todd, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and talking with us today. It's always so wonderful to have you here to talk with our current students and give your wisdom of what you've learned over the last couple of years as a professional within your field. So
Happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much to everybody here. Please feel free to check out our Liberal Arts Career Week events. There's a bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/LA Career Week, all in lowercase. You can check out our events or just Google Liberal Arts Career Week. We still have 2 more days of a lot of awesome programming. And I encourage you all to attend any that interest you. So with that, I will wish you all a very nice evening and we'll hope to see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.